All right, it is just after 1 o'clock, so we're going to get started. Welcome to today's office hours session on appraisals. This is the, I believe, third installment of our performance management series during office hours. So for those of you that are watching live, thank you for being here. For those that are watching the recording, hopefully you find this beneficial on how it ties into everything we've already been talking about. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Alex Carrick. I'm one of the platforms consultants here at Kineo. Really working on TOTRA day in, day out, working on solutions, handling implementation and training, and all around being a resource for you, and always able to answer questions on what you might be having issues with, along with Taylor Craig, who many of you probably know. We form the platform's consultant team. And as I mentioned, today we are going to talk about appraisals. So what they are, how they relate to what we've been talking about, what the experience is, how it's reporting, and when you might use some of these different things. So from TOTRA itself, this is the definition that they give. Obviously, they are using the definition of appraisal in the definition. But ideally, what it is, it's the ability to create an evaluation with multiple steps that involves multiple different people within a specific time frame. So before we get too far into that, we need to handle a little bit of the hierarchy, the structure. So when I start kind of talking about things, they make a little bit more sense. So within an appraisal, there is a hierarchy. And this is not official. If you look through TOTRA for hierarchies, you're going to find something completely different. But in using the words within appraisals, these are the types of things that you should start to hear and be comfortable with. So the overall object or artifact that we're creating is an appraisal. Within the appraisal, there are different stages, stage 1, stage 2, and I'll show you exactly what those look like. Within each stage, there are pages. So similar to pages of a book, pages of a quiz, literally it's content being on different pages within a stage. And then the last one is question. So the question is what's actually being interacted with, how people are answering, and there can be multiple questions on a page. So now that we have that out of the way, let's talk about actual appraisals. So what we're going to do is, if we are here on our demo site, we are going to build on what we've been talking about. If we are going to create a new appraisal, we're going to go to the site administration menu, and you'll see here under performance that appraisals are checked. If you do not have a performance column here, or you do not see appraisals, there's a good chance that those are turned off on your site. And you are able to turn them back on by going to the advanced features down here. But we'll assume you already have these on, and I'll go ahead and click into appraisals. Now, you'll see that we have a few appraisals here. I want to start from the beginning on what this is going to look like. So at the very beginning, we're going to click Create Appraisal. From here, you'll see we're dropped on the General tab. So from here, we'll call this Office Hours Appraisal. We can put a description here if we want, and then we're going to click Create Appraisal. So now we're going to drop into the Content tab. You will see here that we are now in our appraisal. You will see that we now have the ability to add stages. And you'll also see that the draft status here is set to draft. So nothing is going to get sent out, nothing's going to be crazy until you activate your appraisal. But don't do that until you're ready to actually send it out. Otherwise, you'll have to make a copy and start again with a brand new appraisal. So what this looks like from content, we're going to add a stage. We're going to be really creative here in naming our stage. We can add a description. Actually, here, we'll be even fancier. Let's do this. We've got a nice paragraph of random text. And complete by. So for your overall appraisal, you should have a time frame in mind. A big use case that we'll talk about in a little bit is your annual performance reviews. So depending on your stages when those are, we're going to go ahead. Let's say it's let's call it December 1, just for fun. You'll see here that you can leave the dates empty, but you won't be able to activate the appraisal without a date. So if you're looking for something more ongoing, there's probably a different solution for you. And you'll see that we have the ability to lock the stages. I tend to like to just lock everything, so after a stage is done, you don't need to worry about people going in and editing things. And you can bulk create pages. So let's, again, be very creative just so you can get a sense of what this looks like. And click Add Stage. So if you've played with appraisals in the past, version 12 brings some new functionality and some new capabilities and just usability, frankly, from a user's point of view. At any point, you can preview your appraisal. We'll take a look at what that looks like, but because we don't really have any content yet, that's not going to look that exciting. We have our stages. Here's our stage 1 and complete by date. If we add a new stage, it'll go under there. We have our pages that, page 1, page 2, page 3. And finally, we have our content or our questions. So there's a lot of different capabilities that you can put on an appraisal. So if we go down here, for those of you that are similar to the quiz functionality, it's going to look very similar. You can choose a rating scale, you can choose multiple choice, long text, file upload, date picker. For example, I am going to put, let's use multiple choice as an example because I want to show you some of this functionality. And I'm going to click add. So our question is going to be, how would you describe your effort? Let's go this year. Make it timely. So our available choices, let's say great, okay, not great. So obviously a very scientific scale. If you need to add more options here, you can click the add another option button. What I really like about the appraisals is you have the ability to save these options. So if you're going to create a big inventory of questions that are all going to have answers, in a similar scale to this, you don't need to go and type out this every time. Let's call this, again, great, okay, not great. We're going to make this radio buttons. You also have the option of a menu of choices. I'll show you what that looks like. And then on each question, you are going to select who is supposed to answer, who is required to answer, and who can view other people's answers. So mind you, a typical appraisal is between a learner and a manager. That can change, and obviously there are different use cases. But let's say at a very basic level, we want the learner to be able to answer, and they are required to answer. We're going to click Save Changes here. You'll notice that my roles that can answer up here got populated for learner because that's who's going to answer my question. If I add another multiple choice question here, describe your passion this year. And instead of creating new options, I'm going to use my great, okay, not great scale. And I'll put a menu of choices just so we see what that looks like. Once you make the first one, in the same way that we have our potential answers saved here, we now get a new checkbox that's labeled same as preceding question. And that's going to do exactly what it sounds like. When I click that box, it's going to bring in the permissions that I set on the last question. So the idea that you can start creating your appraisal very quickly with it auto-filling what you've already been doing. So now that I have 2 answers on there, I'll go ahead and preview my appraisal. You'll see that I can preview as a learner. If I'm going to preview this, here is my first question with radio buttons. Here is my second question with drop down. You'll notice that my pages are here that have content on them, and that's how the appraisal is going to start being developed. Now, aside from questions, there's a few other things you can add. The reason we chose to do this video after learning plans is because you're able to bring in a lot of the information from learning plans into your appraisal. So if you've gone through the trouble of setting up competencies and then having competencies attached to a learning plan, you can bring those into an appraisal right away. So for example, let's go ahead and bring in a competency. I'm going to click add. I can ask a question. I can include how the user is rated. What I really like, so you'll notice that this is one question here. So I could say like, how do you feel about X competency? Maybe you have more than one question you want to ask about each competency. So that's what this multiple fields tab is. So instead of one question, I can add a few different questions. So if I click competency, perfect. Choose a competency. So now that I do that, I pre-created these areas here so that for every competency a user selects, it's going to ask and have a field for what are their accomplishments and what are their areas of improvement. And I'll show you what that looks like in a little bit. Just like before, we've got same as preceding question, and I can save my changes. Now, let's see if we forgot anything. So we did all of our things from learning plans. If you need to add any type of clarifications, directions, diagrams, similar to if you were in a course, if you were using a label activity, you're able to add fixed images and text. You can bring in user profile information. And the 2 things that I think are really interesting in appraisals are the aggregate rating questions. So if you have a bunch of questions that have a user or a manager rating, if you wanted to average those scores, that's how you would do so. And the redisplay previous question. So as you can imagine, if this were used as a quarterly check-in and you were using the same form and the same questions, but you wanted to bring in the answer from the previous quarter, you'd be able to have that displayed so you don't need to go back and forth. So once you build all of your questions, right, and they can be on multiple pages, it is worth saying, so say for example, we really liked this multiple choice question and we wanted to copy it. So I can copy my multiple choice question. If I want to put this on a new page, I can put it here and you'll see that it highlights. And if I had a second stage, I'd be able to drop this into a stage as well. So once you create one question that you really like, if you're going to reuse it, you can duplicate it and move it around, and you can reorder things via drag and drop. Now, what this looks like for a learner. So if we log out of our admin account, oh, actually, that's a lie. That's not what I wanted to do. Well, here. So let's go. SpongeBob, I believe, is our demo user. If I log in as a user, I'm going to go to performance. You'll see all appraisals, latest appraisal. Let's go latest appraisal. This is an appraisal that I already set up. I did it based on the positional hierarchy. You'll see that it has the participants laid out. And in my initial stage here, well, I guess it probably doesn't make much sense to go through this without showing you exactly what that is. So what we're going to do here is I've set up a really basic workflow where the user is going to answer questions, the manager is going to answer questions, and then together in stage 3, they are going to review those answers together, complete some additional questions, and then complete the appraisal overall. So if I look at my initial responses, I can click Start here. You'll see that it'll always tell you who has to complete the stage, when they're due. I can decide to mark myself here with the sliders for my answer. I'm going to click Next. You'll see I have a multiple choice question. For my competencies, I can select a competency. We're going to look at fryer maintenance. And when I click that, it's going to bring in the current status, and it's going to have me list my accomplishments and my areas of improvement, and I can complete the stage. You'll see that my manager has to complete this stage because they're going to do that independently without seeing each other's answers. And then in the review conversation, that's going to happen in person where they talk through each individual's answers. And what this looks like is if we go to up here, and then I am going to really quickly bring up our password so that I can show you what that appraisal looks like as the admin that we have set up. So let's log out, let's show screen. Once we log back in and we go to appraisals, we have our Krusty Krab annual review. You'll see that I have this assigned. I can click here. In my content, I had my initial responses and my review conversation. My soft skills and hard skills were my pages, and my questions were down here. In the review conversation, well, let's actually, well, we'll be able to do that in a second. So the other part of this is you can decide who you can review their assignments. You'll see that I added the position of cashier and fryer that brought in my initial responses. You can also decide to add messages. So similar to notifications in a program, based on events of when stages are due, stages are complete, users getting access, you can choose your trigger and your timing and your recipients to automate the process of notifying and reminding users of when their appraisals are due, which is important because everything is due date based. So if I log out here, and I believe this was perfect. So now that I'm logged in, under performance, I can go to all appraisals. You'll see that I have appraisals here for Squidward and SpongeBob. Let's use Squidward. I can go to the annual review. As his manager, I'm going to need to go in and fill the same information out. So remember, this is the same option that the user had. So once as a manager, I go through and fill all of this, I can complete the stage. Now, because we've both finished the stage, this is completed. Now I've set this up, so we're gonna have this conversation in person between the employee and the manager. So when I start this, you'll see that I have the the previous stage here is not highlighted. And now I have the ability to bring in my answers and the learner's answers from the previous stage. I can write down any additional information, which is how I had this set, right? And for each question, I brought in both of our previous answers. We can then discuss it and write our notes down. I can then average the scores. That's that aggregate that we were talking about earlier to see if we were on the same page. When I go to the next question, we are now on the hard skills. We've gone through. Once we click next there, oh, there were problems with the data I submitted. Oh, that's why. So don't do what I did and try to rush through this. You actually need to put answers in. And once you do that, we've got more things we need to answer here. You'll see that with that accomplishments and areas of improvement in competencies, we have that set up here, and we can write down anything additional we discussed and complete this stage. And the way I have this set up is that the user has to go in and acknowledge that they've seen it and gone through this as well. So that's why that's showing as incomplete. So that's a really basic example of how you can run an appraisal. Another thing to check here is if we log out. Oh, that's not what I wanted. One moment. Is that as we're going through and creating these, there's always some questions as to this is all great, but how do I report on this as an administrator, right? So it's one thing to be able to do it, it's a different thing to be able to report on it. So to give you an idea of what this looks like, if I go to reports, I've created two reports based on the source. There's the appraisal detail and the appraisal status reports. So the appraisal detail report, you can click exactly which appraisal you're looking for. Let's use our Krusty Krab annual review. And I made a really big table where this is going to show, right, what the learner said, what the manager said, and what the maximum was for everything that we said through here. You'll see that it'll give you the current stage, the user, the appraisal, whether it's completed. It'll go all the way through and it'll give you your maximums, your minimums, your scores, and the system will do all of that for you. If you're not as worried about the actual questions on the appraisal and you're more worried about the status of when people have it done, there's the appraisal status report source that, again, by user, by appraisal, it'll tell you what stage they're in, when the current stage is due, and what their status is, and if they've completed it or not. So those are the big benefits of appraisals. Some of our use cases that I frequently hear clients using is performance reviews. You know, if those are annual, if those are biannual, if those are quarterly, any type of regular review process that you might be using, you know, other systems, other solutions for, you can do it within your core TOTRA site. Performance improvement plans, it's a great way to be able to be accountable and tie in, you know, different aspects of learning plans and being able to rate and score and kind of have a holistic view on a PIP. And the last thing is for new employee orientation. If there are things that need to be checked off on by a manager or things that users need to do or demonstrate at a basic level, or the manager, you know, just to facilitate that conversation and that relationship building at the beginning of an employee's term, that's another good instance of an appraisal. So that being said, I will open it up for questions. I want to take a second to thank you for coming to today's office hours sessions on appraisals. We are here every 2 weeks and highly recommend that you sign up to attend the live sessions. This has been our third installment of performance management tools, and we'll have a few more left, and then hopefully tie those together to show you what a full performance management suite within TOTRA is going to look like. I look forward to seeing you all here soon, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.